Welcome to Oran Park and this Rothmans 2+4 meeting, a mixed car and motorcycle meeting, and to the second round of the 1979 Australian Sports Sedan Championship, about to get underway. There are the grid positions, the full field of 30 cars lined up for 23 laps of the Grand Prix 2.6 kilometre Oran Park circuit, 60 kilometres of the race, and it's a very ferocious field indeed. Allan Grice and Jim Richards on the front row of the grid. Second row of the grid sees Phil Lucas and Edmondson in the pretty little Alfetta, the car right on the left side of your screen there. On the third row of the grid, Allan Moffat in 25, and in number 20 beside him is Wayne Mankin, the Victorian, and the ex-Peter Brock car. And further back it's Phil Lucas, Phil Ward's teammate. They're lined up and ready to go and away. And a very good start to both on the front row. A lot of wheel spin to the Allan Grice Corvair. But it's leapt, well, it's undecided as to who's in the lead, but it looks as though it's going to be Richards. By gee, they try hard, and Grice leads Richards. But Richards perched well inside him to go down on the inside on the next corner, which he tries to do. But still Grice leads him, with Lucas back there in third place. Grice, Richards, Lucas, then Edmondson in the Alpha, then Moffat, then Phil Lucas. 23 screaming laps around the Grand Prix circuit here at Oran Park. Grice so desperately keen to get going with the Corvair, a car that he's had mechanical troubles with this year, defending his Sports Sedan title. Yesterday it looked as though Richards had pole position tied up with a lap of 72.2, but Grice then in the second session came and pulled out a 71.5 second practice lap, remembering that the record set a couple of years ago by Richards was at 75.3, so 3.8 seconds under the lap record was Allan Grice in practices yesterday.
Well, just watching this very tense, sweaty poured first lap, I cannot believe that Grice is going to be able to maintain this pace. It was a very willing, very thrusting opening lap from Grice, and I don't know that he's so much drawn away from Jim Richards at this stage, but that Jim Richards has said, okay, boyo, you just go on like that for a while and I'll sit back and see what happens.
Grice pulled out nearly an additional 2 seconds between the first and the second practice session yesterday, and he said it was really just a fine setting up, suspension work mainly, of Frank Gardner, the man that piloted the car in 2 previous years to Sports Sedan titles, but who also conceived and designed the car. And he said the car is so sensitive to fine setting up, to adjusting to ride heights and other settings in the suspension, that he doesn't think he'd be able to run it anywhere near successfully if he didn't have Frank Gardner's help.
Well, there's no doubt these are very complex, very subtle motor cars. Virtually, as they're colloquially described, 405,000 cars with somebody's body shell wrapped around them. They're not quite that, but they're certainly incorporating most of the current racing car technology, a lot of the racing car hardware, and they're consequently every bit as difficult to set up as a conventional open-wheel front-line car.
Grice doing a lot of work there to stay in front of Richards, followed then by Phil Ward doing a marvellous job in the ex-Gagan Monaro. That's Moffat we're looking at. He's in 5th place at this stage, and you can see the gap there over the first 5 cars. Allan Moffat bringing his Chevy Monza out of wraps after a 2.5-year layoff, and has had a fairly exciting time here in practices. Had a violent spin on Friday off the Bridgestone Bridge, had a spin here yesterday, and also had the throttle stick further up in the S's, and was very lucky to keep the car. Well, he didn't keep it off the wall, but didn't do much damage. And gone by the wayside is John Briggs, the South Australian, in a similar car, originally a similar car to Moffat's, a Chevy Monza. Bad luck for him, but you can see he's had major mechanical problems.
Yes, the computer car Monza does not compute.
Well, here's Grice trying so hard, and yet Richards keeping him within cooey. 2 very dissimilar cars in concept. Of course, the Corvair, originally a rear-engine car with the engine hanging out the back, now with the engine brought forward of the back axle, but still a rear-engine configuration. Richards' car, on the other hand, has the front engine moved back so it is sitting absolutely alongside the driver. So both of them virtually mid-engine cars, but Richards perhaps slightly more so, as the engine is alongside the driver, whereas in Grice's car, which is now being caught, I think, just a bit by Richards, in Grice's car the engine is actually behind him, but forward of the back axle.
Both cars have got independent rear suspension, which is extremely valuable, I would think, on a circuit like Oran Park, where acceleration and traction out of slow corners is very important. It enables them to get their power down fairly effectively.
Well, interesting to know whether Grice has backed off his pace slightly or whether Richards has decided to go off and hound him, because there's no question that he's narrowing the gap, and I think it's Richards trying a little bit harder. We can see him stepping just a little bit wide there. In behind them, Phil Ward doing a marvellous job in this big and enormously powerful car, the ex-Gagan 6-litre Monaro that's in third place at this stage, and Tony Edmondson, the Tasmanian, doing an equally excellent job in the Alfetta coupe, very pretty car, pretty when it originally started. That's Ward's car in third place, 6 litres and 630 brake horsepower, he claims. The most enormous amount of steam probably from any car on any Australian racetrack at this stage.
Yes, it's certainly the most powerful car at this meeting, and curiously enough, not one of the heaviest. It weighs about 19.5 hundredweight before they slot half a hundredweight of the driver into it, and it's a very ingenuous motor car in its own way, in that it's not bristling with heavy technology. It's still got live rear axle. It's still very largely whole subframing underneath, and it's a very simple sports sedan, just $50,000 worth of simple sports sedan.
His teammate Phil Lucas has parked his Holden Monaro number 2, which was previously running in 6th place, but he's got troubles and he's pulled out. So bad luck for the very tall man, Phil Lucas, previously the driver of the Volvo V8.
We've got a lap time, Bill, of 71.5 for Grice, 2 laps to go. Almost a second improvement on those rather desperate early laps.
It's Russell Kramer in 35, leading quite a bunch of people. Kramer has been a punter of various modified Ford Falcons for quite some years now, starting with a very simple looking one about 10 years ago. Nowhere near the budgets of the top runners, but as you can see, having a Grandice there. A lot of pressure on him indeed. Bob Stevens is the man in behind them in number 4. And sandwiched in between them is Pat Cray, the Victorian, in the Cortina V8. So it's Russell Kramer, Pat Cray, and then Bob Stevens making up those 3.
And Ken Hastings just glimpsing into view there in that horrible yellow Carmen gear. Good to see Ken Hastings back, incidentally, after his terrible start line shunt at Winton, where he didn't start and everybody else did, and he finally collected a back marker who was travelling very fast.
So while the front runners romp away, we look further back through the field where there's some good dices. You can see there Hastings with this, again with a V8 engine forward of the rear axle. It's actually an elephant back end in that car, and with a V8 engine slotted in forward of the back axle, he's catching Bob Stevens. In front of him, Pat Cray in number 30, and then forward of him, as we look at the screen, is Russell Kramer in the Falcon number 35. Race leader, Allan Grice, off the Ridgestone Bridge, where Moffat had a wild lose on Friday in private practices. Moffat's still running 5th, so it's the race order with 17 laps to go in a 23-lap race. So they have done 5 and are on their 6th. It's Grice from Richards, and further back Phil Ward. Ward dropping quite a way back, in fact. Tony Edmondson in the Alpha, and car 60 is Jerry Strawberg there in the Rothmans fence. Run wide and down the bottom of the straight as Allan Grice goes through. And in behind, as we were giving you the race positions, in behind Tony Edmondson is Allan Moffat, still in 5th place. Gap from Grice to Richards, 1st and 2nd place, 2.8 seconds, and the gap back to 3rd place to Phil Ward has lengthened now to 7.2 seconds. Corvair is going to be outed by regulations next year because it's changed the rear engine location respective to the back axle, and that's not going to be allowed us from next year. But Richard's car will still be legal, basically a two-door Falcon, but as I say, with the engine moved right back and behind the beside the driver, that what looks like Falcon bodywork held together actually by a subframe of tubing and space frame construction, and the gap now 2.2 seconds, reduced from 2.8. So Richard's out in pursuit of Allan Grice. 8 laps completed, they're on their 9th.
There's no doubt Grice is setting a tremendous pace, because this is not the smooth, imperturbable Jim Richards that we're used to watching.
And that's Tony Edmondson in the Alfa. He's in 4th position. He's behind Phil Ward in car number 3, and doing a good job. First time he's been here. Previously, the driver of the John McCormack Charger. There's Moffat on him.
So I think Edmondson might have some troubles, which is a shame. What a pretty little car it is.
It is. It's a beautifully put together car.
But he seemed to me to be taking very self-effacing lines down through the off the end of the straight, as though he was saying to people, well, you pass me if you want. But down this section of the circuit, he's desperately fast. In fact, the car looks terrific.
Well, one of the lightest and most agile, probably, of all the top cars, which would suit it around that very, very tight section of circuit.
Well, this particular gadget is just unreal. It would be perhaps the most glamorous Australian special, to use the terminology of 20 years ago, that I've ever seen. The panel work inside is superb. The presentation of the engine and the mechanical components under the shell is superb, and the actual suspension design is fastidious.
And while Edmondson's having his being kept busy by Moffat hounding him up at the lead, it's the gap between first and second is now down to 1.4 seconds. Look at Moffat down inside Edmondson, as Edmondson is nowhere near at maximum speed on the straight. So Moffat goes up to 4th, Edmondson back to 5th. And with the lead, we'll keep our eyes on that too, because as Moffat moves up 1 place, and Edmondson wants to get round back past him.
Edmondson, I say, has got no 5th gear. He's got the lower range gears, right, but he hasn't got the top end.
Could well be so. But the gap between first and second is narrowing all the time, as Moffat tries to consolidate in 4th place there, but Edmondson wants to get back past him on the tight stuff. There's Grice and Richards, and look at that gap now. That is now 1.2 seconds, and it's a close race indeed as he goes down inside the Mustang of Bob Stevens. They've got a lot of difficulty through traffic here. He's now got to face Pat Cray. Richards trying to slip under Cray, and does so. Cray goes right out wide, so they both pass 2 of them. They still have to face Russell Kramer in 35, and if he balks Grice, it'll be fatal. Grice gets a good run. Kramer sees him, waves him through on the right-hand side, so Grice is through. What's happening to Richards? And Richards gets through now, but you can see it cost him valuable yards and tenths of seconds. Down into the S's. With 10 laps completed, they're on their 11th in this 23-lap, 60-kilometre second round of the Australian Sports Sedan Championship.
Well, this could be the test of this legendary new Allan Grice that we've been seeing so much of the last 12 months or so. Grice being able to keep his cool under pressure. The traffic situation there, I thought he handled very well. An older Allan Grice, a former Allan Grice, I think, would not have hesitated to punch his way through a hole that wasn't really there. But this time he was sufficiently restrained, wasted no time, and lost nothing.
Wayne Mankin, bad luck for him, because he was gridded in 6th grid position with a good practice time in the Holden Turbo yesterday of 75.8 seconds. It's an EH Holden, but with a turbo charger on the engine. But he's out of the race now as Grice continues with this increasing pressure from the New Zealander and last year's co-winner of the Hardy Frodo with Peter Brock, Jim Richards. Grice has had a frustrating season so far this year. He's often said practice times in both the Corvair and his Tirana improved touring car that would indicate that he was set for a win. But so many times he's had minor mechanical problems. At Amaru recently, he broke drive shafts in 2 different races in the Corvair. At Lakeside, in the first round of the championship, he had problems. Richards taking first place, Tony Edmondson in the Alfa taking second, Grice coming in third, and Russell Kramer finished fourth. That was the first round of the championship at the beginning of this month.
Very interesting there, Bill. The gap has returned almost to what it was after 2 or 3 laps of the race. Whether Grice was just taking it easy for a while, but certainly he's reclaimed the margin that he's lost.
Out of this tight back section of this circuit, that's down at Ampol Corner, up over the bridge, which is called Bridgestone Bridge, and round towards Goodyear Corner. This hard descending right-hander that brings them into the S's. This is the 2.61 kilometre Grand Prix circuit at Oran Park. Straighten from the S's and then to Sutton's. This hard uphill left-hander, which actually is a very fast corner indeed, as Richards is showing you. Then the dog leg, and down to VP Bend. Down hard under brakes. A time for Grice of 72 seconds, so the lap record absolutely shot to pieces. Previously 75.3, and now down as low as around 72, although that's unofficial timing. Jim Richards still in second place down the straight. They come to Tirana Corner down here at the bottom of the straight. After going through that and then further braking at Rothmans Corner, where you see there car number 60, Jerry Strawberg, that came to grief earlier. And then the next right-hander, this tight one that brings them into the tight wiggly back section of the circuit, is Coca-Cola Corner. Then they go down to Ampol, and then again the bridge. So that's the 2.61 kilometres of the Grand Prix circuit. At Ampol Corner now, looking at Jim Richards, car number 12, chasing Allan Grice.
In the very handsome car, isn't it, Bill? It looks more Ford Falcon than the average racing Ford Falcon, in fact. Production Falcon. It's got no guard flares. In fact, the car's been very carefully constructed, I think, to present the slipperiest possible shape. You'll notice the almost integrated front spoiler that just scraping above the ground, and the way in which the Perspex windows are very carefully taken out to the edges of the body moulding to minimise the drag. You'll also notice the way in which they're vibrating and flexing, very characteristic, I think, of a lightweight car.
Under the bonnet, the only thing there is a radiator and a scoop for it, and the subframe and the suspension. Everything mechanical is back with the driver. Looking then at Allan Grice's car in the lead. Still further back in third place is Phil Lucas. Still in fourth place is Allan Moffat, consolidating now over Tony Edmondson.
Well, this is turning out to be a most impressive demonstration, I think, from Allan Grice. He's shown every bit of necessary muscle and determination when it was required at the beginning of the race, and now he's settling down to drive a very polished race at the most difficult place in the whole circuit, right out of the lead.
Yes, Grice has come forward enormously, and he'd be the first to admit it in the last 18 months under the tutelage of Frank Gardner. Gardner has helped him enormously on the mechanical side of setting cars up, but also in racecraft and tactics and curbing any potential over-enthusiasm, and certainly Grice had plenty of that. One of the most exciting and panel-bending men in Australian racing 18 months ago, and now you'd find him very hard-pressed to talk him into those sort of tactics. The lead, the gap between first and second now is 3 seconds, and there are the places, as you can see, after 15 laps with 8 to go. Still a lot of traffic, and Grice really having to keep his wits about him, but he'll be a very jubilant man if he can pull off this win, because, as I said earlier, he really has had a lot of disappointing times this season where practice potential has not been realised during the race. He still is under a lot of pressure from Richards, and it would take only a very minor error indeed for Richards to swoop through to the lead. You can see how sensitive the car is to throttle and to line there as it sits and moves and squats.
The fact remains that, for example, rather like the pure racing motorcycles that are also on today's program, when they're right on the limit, they're working very hard. and they need very close attention indeed. They're nervous, fractious, very twitchy things.
And the old cure for FJ Holden's of sandbags in the boot was actually once utilised by Gardner and Grice in that car, and they actually ran it in a race with sandbags to help keep the back end down before when they hadn't had time to do other more sophisticated suspension sorting. So Grice going well, and at this stage pulling away to over 3 seconds from Richards. And a big blow up there for number 21, that's Stephen Carr in his Holden Tirana. He blew just at the start-finish line and managed to roll to that part of the circuit, but the cloud of smoke tells everything. Down towards Sutton's corner. Grice in command of the car that Ralph Nader said was, quote, unsafe at any speed. And of course, it was that campaign that killed the Chevrolet Corvair virtually.
Well, Bill, if I could qualify that, what Mr. Nader was really getting excited about was the production four-door Corvair, whereas this is in fact a very elegant, specialised sort of Corvair, the Corvair Sprint, which was a darling car.
Bob Stevens there in number 4 has been lapped by the leading cars. We saw him earlier in that dice with Pat Cray, car number 30, and with car number 35, Russell Kramer. Kramer's previously been into the pits, but Bob Stevens there continuing and well placed.
Very historic Mustang. That one was raced in the States by one of the most affectionately remembered of the American sedan car peddlers of the Trans Am era, Jerry Titus, before it came to Australia. So that if there is such a thing as a historic sedan car, this would have to be one of them, I think.
Left-hand drive, as you can see. Bob Stevens has campaigned himself for, what, 4 odd years?
Had a lot of good wins with it too. It's just, it's too old-fashioned these days.
And here's Moffat coming up to lap him. Moffat still holding down 4th position. Edmondson in the Alfa still going and is in 5th place behind him.
That gives an illustration perhaps of where the margin lies. In top speed down the straight, they're roughly comparable, those two cars, but handling and braking, Moffat's going to have the edge on him.
Yes, motor racing these days is not so much about top speed, which it once was the critical factor, but it's about speed through corners and under brakes. That's where the big margins occur. The cars are going a little faster or slower in Formula One or at Bathurst, for instance, than they were many years ago, but they're much, much quicker around corners. As we look again at the leader, Allan Grice, now with just 5 laps to go, 4 and a bit, as he comes to the Bridgestone Bridge, and it looks to be a nice win for Allan Grice, which would be a nice revenge for his 3rd place in the first round. It would still leave him slightly behind Richards if Richards finishes 2nd, because Richards picked up 9 in the first round. It would pick up 6 points for this 2nd place, giving him 15. Grice had 4 and will get 9 if he finishes in 1st here. We'll give him 13. So Grice will still be 2 points in arrears in the 9-round championship for this year's title.
The very interesting thing, Bill, at this stage is the distance that's now drawn out from Grice to Jim Richards, and it's in fact about 7 seconds, but Edmondson is not having terribly much trouble staying with him around the back part of the circuit. Richards seems to me to have conceded that he's not going to win. He's going to make sure he finishes 2nd.
A very distorted looking Tirana in behind Grice as they went down the straight. Appears to have pulled off now, but it's a very lopsided looking car. But Grice on what looks to be his winning way. He really is nicely situated at this stage with his much, much bigger lead now. Look at how much Richards has fallen back with 7 seconds, and it must be greater than that now. So from pressure from Richards, the very opposite is happening, and Richards is tending to have to hold on, because 3rd place behind him is Phil Ward going so well, stepping up to the enormous power of the ex-Gagan Monaro after having run previously a VDA Escort, adapting so well to the big power and the great weight of that car.
And our timing tells us that Grice is still lapping in 72.2, so that he's not backed off very much at all. It seems to me that it's Jim Richards who's having the hard time at the moment. The motor car not looking terribly comfortable down around the back of the circuit.
Jim Richards certainly some sort of a problem that would drop him so suddenly from 2 seconds in arrears to now around 8. Grice in front of Bob Stevens there in the dark blue Mustang behind him, and coming up to lap the Chev Camaro. Phil Ward in car number 3, still holding down 3rd place in behind. Grice in 1st place in car number 1. Richards 2nd place. Jim Richards in car number 12. 3rd place Phil Ward is in car 3. And Moffat is right on Phil Ward. 3rd and 4th place, quite a dice developing, in fact, potentially, between Phil Ward and Allan Moffat. Car numbers 3 and 25. Grice in BP then. He's coming round to complete his 3rd last lap, to complete his 21st lap and to start off on his 2nd last lap. 13.3 seconds his lead. His pit crew tell him.
Unless it was a 1 minute 13.3 lap. But each could be true, in fact, at the moment. Well, that's a change from the view on the first lap, isn't it? There's just no one in sight who can challenge Grice now. The motor car looking as though it knows it. Much steadier on the road. Grice almost, you could say, composed as he points it round off the bridge down onto the original part of the circuit.
Driving by Grice and by Richards. The sort of rubber they're laying around the circuit will not please the motorcyclists later on the program, because that represents grave danger for the motorcyclists. It really does make conditions very slippery.
And here's this dice between Phil Ward and Allan Moffat, and there's very little in it.
Again, an ailing motor car, I'd suggest, Graham, that Phil Ward has slipped back so much, and with a 6-litre car is having difficulty holding off Moffat on the straight.
Yes, he comes good just at the top end, but there's very little in it.
11 seconds, the gap between 1st and 2nd, so that would have been a 73.3 second lap being shown by the pit crew, and it's a massive 51 seconds back to the dice here for 3rd and for 4th place.
And that's
Lucas
where the race is right
Moffat.
now.
And that's going to be a desperate dice.
Yes, with the handling section to follow, and Moffat really getting stuck into it there, getting bounced over a little curb.
Very nearly a touch by G, they were close. Moffat looking for a desperate way round Lucas. Down into the S's. The leading cars on their last lap, and checkered flag waiting for them.
Oh, and Moffat timing that very nicely, getting back on the run into Suttons and getting a big run out. But not quite enough road, perhaps, for him to make the most of it.
They have a lap to go as the leaders are round behind them. So there's another lap to go for this dice. Just in behind them is the race leaders, Allan Grice, and 11 seconds back to Jim Richards. So they go off on their last lap. And here's the winner, Allan Grice, the winner of the 2nd round of the Australian Sports Sedan Championship. Jim Richards should be next to finish, and that dice continuing. Richards coming up to the dog leg now. He's a long way back. He's fallen to greater than 11 seconds in arrears. This is Richards coming in to take 2nd place, but it's Lucas and Moffat fighting out the final lap for them in this 23-lap 2nd round of the Australian Sports Sedan Championship. Here's Ward, and there's Moffat behind him.
And the slow car in front.
So, well and truly a race on here between the two of them. And anything can happen. Through Sutton's the next corner, the dog leg the one after that, and BP the final one. Moffat having a real go.
He's got him boxed.
But not good enough for Lucas. He knew he had to get out there, and not daunted by the reputation of Allan Moffat, who probably will try and go down inside now. No, I think he's had enough.
Very precautionary line down, tightening inside. Moffat could still, in fact, knock him off on the run to the line. This is where Moffat seemed to have the acceleration earlier, but no.
So that was 3rd and 4th place. Phil Lucas in 3rd, Phil Ward at least. Phil Lucas retired from the race. Phil Ward, the former Escort driver, in third place. Moffat taking fourth, just behind him. And Moffat will be growling about that touch from Phil Ward, but it's nothing that Moffat wouldn't have done himself in the same circumstance.
I suppose you're right, and in fact Moffat made a very shrewd assessment of the role that slower car was going to play, and let Phil Ward, in fact, back himself into a bit of a trap.
The results there, and the winner, Allan Grice, the Craven Mild Chevrolet Corvair. The Australian Sports Sedan Championship winning car for the last 3 years. 76 and 1977 in the hands of Frank Gardner, in 1978 in the hands of Allan Grice, and this year now lying second place in the point score, 2 points behind Jim Richards on 15 points, the first round winner, Allan Grice, with 13, as he goes to the finish, to the presentation, and no doubt also to talk to Bob Vincent very shortly. Ken Hamilton's car, Hastings at least, 33, a non-finisher. The Carmen gear being wheeled away. Quite a high mortality rate throughout that fairly short race, because even some of the ones that finished were slowed quite considerably in the latter part of the race. Presentation very shortly, I'd think, to Allan Grice. Frank Gardner moving in there to check on the car, just see how the back tyres look and the rear suspension. He's ducked down behind the car at this stage. There he is, standing up in the traditional and inevitable white cotton hat. Very talented man, an engineer and a man who can look at a suspension and say whether it's theoretically right or wrong, and then in practice drive the car, sort it out and say what needs to be done.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just seen the second round of the Australian Sports Sedan Championship, and that championship, of course, that round has been won by Allan Grice. To make the presentation to Allan Grice, I would like to introduce to you Terry Powell, who is the manager of Rothmans in New South Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, Terry Powell.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. Prior to presenting the trophy, I would just like to say on behalf of Rothmans how happy we've been to be associated with the second round of the Australian Sports Sedan Championships and our association with Oran Park Raceway. To all the competitors today, their pit crews and their co-sponsors, thank you indeed for your support. And to the ABC for telecasting live throughout the Commonwealth all the action of today's meeting. The race was a thriller, and I'm indeed very happy to present the trophy to the winner of today's second round of the Australian Sports Sedan Championships, Allan Grice. And Allan is no longer the bridesmaid, as was reported in the paper yesterday, but in fact the winner of today's race. And a thrilling race it was. Congratulations indeed, Allan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your company's continued participation in motor racing. We all appreciate it. Those of us that compete and those that sit out there. I'd like to, without boring you with great lists of names and things, just thank my crew and all the people that are associated with my entry. The efforts of Frank Gardner in leading up to this race, in bringing the car up to the pitch that is, and the guys that worked with him was tremendous. But really, I was very close to it, and it was a tremendous effort. And I'd certainly like to thank them all for the presentation of our Craven Mile car today. Thank you.